Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into one of the most powerful and honestly, most demanding trade mechanisms operating in the global economy right now. It's essentially a massive system of huge rewards and extremely strict rules, and understanding it gives us a really incredible window into how global trade actually works.
Picture this for a second. You're trying to sell your country's goods in Europe, obviously one of the most lucrative markets on Earth. Now imagine suddenly being granted a 0% tax rate on your imports. Zero. It is an absolute game changer. But it really begs the question, what would you be willing to do, or what kind of massive systemic changes would your country be willing to make to keep that kind of economic advantage?
Well, here's our roadmap for today to figure that out. We're going to cover 1. The EU trade incentive, 2. The 27 mandatory conventions, 3. Pakistan's economic boost, 4. The timeline of the agreement, and finally, number 5, the looming 2027 deadline.
Okay, let's jump straight into Section 1, the EU trade incentive. We're going to start by looking at the carrot of this deal and breaking down what this economic reward actually is.
So it's known as GSP+, which stands for the Generalized Scheme of Preferences Plus. Basically, this is a special trade incentive program managed by the European Union. Its whole purpose is to help vulnerable, developing countries grow their economies and boost their exports. But, and this is key, it's definitely not a free pass. It's an exchange. The EU removes import duties so goods are way cheaper to sell in Europe, but in return, the beneficiary countries have to commit to sweeping global standards. It's a brilliant example of how the EU uses its massive market size as leverage to push for sustainable development and real institutional reform in developing nations.
And the sheer scale of this benefit is just staggering. GSP Plus grants zero-duty access to over 2/3, that's 66% of all tariff lines. Think about that for a second. If you're a developing nation, having taxes completely eliminated on 66% of the product lines you export is an unbelievable catalyst for growth. It slashes your trade costs and makes your products vastly more competitive on European shelves.
Moving on to Section 2, the 27 mandatory conventions. Let's talk about the heavy price of admission for all those perks.
Because, that 66% tariff elimination doesn't come for free. We call this part the stick. To keep the trade benefits, these nations can't just make a vague promise. They must successfully sign, implement, and actually uphold exactly 27 strict international conventions. These are totally non-negotiable, and they cover 4 crucial areas: human rights, labor standards, environmental protection, and good governance. So we're talking about ensuring worker safety, adhering to clean energy standards, and protecting fundamental freedoms. And the EU doesn't just take their word for it either. They do regular monitoring missions to make sure the laws on paper actually match the actions out in the field.
Let's head into Section 3, Pakistan's economic boost, and see how these abstract policies translate into tangible economic realities.
To really understand this, we need to look at a major beneficiary. Grounding our focus on Pakistan reveals the massive real-world impact of the GSP Plus arrangement. Pakistan has actually held GSP Plus status since January of 2014, making it one of the largest single users of the entire program. We aren't just talking about a minor little trade boost here. This is an arrangement that fundamentally impacts the whole nation's economy.
For Pakistan, getting that zero-duty access triggered massive growth, especially in manufacturing and textiles. Suddenly, products like cotton, apparel, leather, and home textiles became incredibly competitive in Europe. And this export surge doesn't just mean higher profits for a few business owners. It translates directly into millions of jobs in local factories and communities. Plus, this influx of European trade brings in billions in vital foreign exchange revenue. That plays a huge role in stabilizing Pakistan's foreign exchange reserves and easing the pressure on its balance of payments. It's essentially helping keep the nation's finances afloat.
All right, Section 4, Timeline of the Agreement. Let's see how the rules of this game are changing.
International trade deals are never static, right? Following this timeline gives us a really clear trajectory. Back in 2006, the EU reformed its old framework to focus on sustainable development. Then, as we just talked about, Pakistan enters the picture in 2014. Fast forward to late 2023, and the European Parliament voted to extend the existing rules, basically keeping the current framework alive until the end of 2027. But the most important date on this timeline is what comes next. The EU has formally adopted a newly revised, much stricter regulation that's set to take effect on January 1st, 2027. Which brings us to Section 5, the looming 2027 deadline, the ticking clock for the global trade landscape.
This transition in 2027 is not just a simple date change, it's a huge shift in policy. When you compare the two frameworks, the differences are pretty stark. The current setup, ending in December 2027, leans heavily on positive conditionality.
rewarding good behavior. But the new 2027 regulation, it introduces a much stricter regime of negative conditionality. What that actually means is faster-acting punishments and rapid withdrawals of benefits if a country systematically breaches those 27 conventions. It expands compliance standards, adds things like cooperation on migrant readmissions, and essentially shrinks the grace periods. The enforcement is getting significantly sharper.
So what does this mean for a major partner like Pakistan? Well, based on recent EU monitoring reports, remaining eligible for this new 2027 framework requires some pretty urgent attention. The EU is looking way beyond just having good laws on the books now. They are demanding tangible, on-the-ground legislative and institutional improvements. Specifically, they've highlighted an urgent need to address concerns around human rights implementation, freedom of expression, and robust anti-corruption measures. To keep that 66% tariff-free access, local actions have to align perfectly with global expectations.
Which leaves us with one really vital question for the future of international trade. We've seen the unbelievable economic power of the GSP plus carrot, and now we're seeing the sharpening of the stick. As 2027 rapidly approaches, will major beneficiaries be able to enact the deep systemic reforms required to secure their zero-tariff future? Or will these new, faster-acting withdrawal mechanisms end up fundamentally disrupting the global supply chain? It's a fascinating balance of economics and global governance, and it's something we'll absolutely be keeping a close eye on. Thanks so much for joining me for this